I'm not a perfectionist. That shouldn't come as a surprise, considering some of the pronunciation mistakes made throughout these podcasts. I fully admit that I have gotten some things wrong. Yet regional dialects and translation issues mean that no matter how hard I try, someone somewhere will think the pronunciation isn't perfect. I believe in not letting perfection be the enemy of good. I also believe in deadlines. Aiming for perfection regularly means blowing deadlines, annoying collaborators, and missing opportunities due to tunnel vision. American education has entered a phase where it seeks mastery of individual subjects and standards. The idea is that students shouldn't pass unless they've proven mastery of the knowledge taught. This often means the students are allowed to retake portions of exam they performed poorly on. Many traditionalists have had trouble adjusting their policies for this new era of education. I am among those who believe the test retakes merely encourage students to game the system by taking the test, studying the material they were unsure of, and then acing the exam. Edtopia points out that when that happens, it's a net zero game. Neither subject mastery nor personal responsibility is achieved. As is true throughout education, the concept of mastery isn't new. In the 1960s, Benjamin Bloom sought to turn traditional end-of-chapter assessments into learning tools, rather than purely evaluative ones. Take homework, for instance. Sure, students miss points on the work, but the goal is for them to learn from their mistakes so they get it right on the test. Allowing retakes in the name of mastery shifts formative assessments into just another homework assignment, one that they can learn from and correct their mistakes. Education Week explains that assessments alone do little to improve student learning or teaching quality. What counts is what happens after the assessments. Just as regularly checking your weight or blood pressure does little to improve your health if you do nothing with the information, what matters most with formative assessments is what students and teachers do with the results. There are ways to limit how much students can game the system, including switching up the questions. Mastery is a notable goal, but mastery isn't perfection. The latter is a search for something that few believe is attainable. Leo Tolstoy, whose work War and Peace is considered one of the greatest works of literary art, warns us that if you look for perfection, you'll never be content. This sentiment could describe Leonardo da Vinci and his greatest work of art, the Mona Lisa. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon the original Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci. Episode number 5, The Search for Perfection. Leonardo da Vinci was already an established Renaissance man when he began the preparatory work for what would become the most famous painting in the world. The year was 1503, and Leonardo had just returned to Florence after serving as Cesare Borgia's military engineer. He had long been known for not finishing his works, so it likely wasn't surprising to his peers that he hadn't completed the painting when he returned to Milan 3 years later. What ought to surprise everyone who was queued up to see the masterpiece in the halls of the Louvre is that Leonardo never finished it. He carried it with him from Milan to Paris, adding light brushstrokes over the years. But it was never done to his liking, and thus was never officially declared finished. Mystery is at the center of this masterpiece. Historian Walter Isaacson writes that what began as a portrait of a silk merchant's young wife became a quest to portray the complexities of human emotion, made memorable through the mysteries of a hinted smile. and to connect our nature to that of our universe. The landscape of her soul and of nature's soul are intertwined. It is believed that the woman depicted is Lisa del Giocondo, and that the commission was paid for by her husband. The name of the painting essentially means the Lady Lisa. Her identity seems confirmed by Giorgio Vasari, the first biographer of Da Vinci, but his description suggests that he never saw the actual work of art. The family is known to have worked with Leonardo's family, a notary of some renown within Florence's community of wealthy patrons. This commission was likely just another of a long list of works procured by Leonardo's father, helping him overcome the reputation that he never finished his work. Lisa, the subject of the masterpiece, would have been 24 at the time of the rendering, and had already given birth to 2 sons. Many art historians point out that the Mona Lisa includes traits reminiscent of the way Renaissance artists depicted the Virgin Mary. The mother of Jesus was considered at the time to be the pinnacle of female beauty, which has led some to wonder about the true identity of Lisa. Some suggest that the portrait is actually Isabel d'Este, a renowned patron of the arts during the Renaissance. Leonardo's notebooks include sketches that depict a similar-looking woman with her arms crossed in the same manner as the Mona Lisa. Her collection of letters reveals that she requested the promised painted portrait numerous times. Others point to the fact that the Mona Lisa is sitting with an armrest, something that denoted a sovereign. While the family was quite wealthy, it would have been a massive overreach for them to proclaim themselves as leaders of an Italian city-state. The presence of mountains in the background was more fitting for the known whereabouts of Isabella rather than Lisa. Yet contemporary evidence, including a note sketched in the margins of one of Agostino Vespucci's books, seems to confirm that during the time period in question, Da Vinci was indeed focused on his portrait of Lisa Giocondo. While Isabella d'Este is a plausible alternative, speculation about Da Vinci's intentions has run rampant. Da Vinci doesn't leave behind too many clues. Unlike his other works of art, his notebooks are silent on this particular job. There is no proof of commission, contract details, or preparatory sketches. The Atlantic sums up the collection of strange suggestions regarding the truth about Lisa. Martin Kemp, an art history professor at Oxford, claims that he has been bombarded over the years with insane theories regarding the work of art. Among them are believers that Mona Lisa was secretly Salai, Leonardo's long-term assistant and likely boyfriend. Others have made a fortune by superimposing Da Vinci's self-portraits over the Lisa, suggesting that the Renaissance man was really depicting himself as a woman, an early attempt at imagining a transgender transition before the medical community had figured out the process. Some have stared at the painting long enough to convince themselves that looking at it upside down reveals a lion, ape, and buffalo's head. The National Committee for the Promotion of Historical and Cultural Heritage claims that minute L's and V's are visible within her eyes, serving as the unofficial signing of his work. Angelo Perico, an art historian, claims that Lisa may have been Leonardo's mother. He also believes in another fringe theory that she was a Chinese slave. While it is possible that the answers to who the Mona Lisa is, where she sat for her famous portrait, and why it wasn't delivered might exist in one of Da Vinci's lost notebooks, it is just as likely that Leonardo didn't need any for this piece of art. Isaacson notes that the Mona Lisa shows the development of Leonardo's painterly skills, and more importantly, his maturation as a scientist, philosopher, and humanist. He wouldn't have been able to paint her cheekbone structure or lips without first having worked for 2 periods across a decade dissecting human bodies to study the intricate structure of the human body. He wouldn't have been able to drape her dress over her shoulders without first having completed countless hours perfecting his ability through Verrocchio's drapery studies. He couldn't have balanced the foreground perfectly with the background until he had figured out how to paint from an aerial perspective, a technique that originated between his lifelong dual obsessions of flight and nature. Indeed, he couldn't paint such a beautiful background until he saw it crisscrossing northern Italy based on the whims of the psychopath Cesare Borgia. Clark writes that the science, the pictorial skill, the obsession with nature, the psychological insight are all there, and so perfectly balanced that at first we are hardly aware of them. The Mona Lisa was the culmination of Da Vinci's life's work, a final project showcasing that he had learned from his prior mistakes, proof that he had achieved mastery. His technique of sfumato, which he first revealed while painting Verrocchio's Angel, is found throughout the image. The bone structure is far more evident here than in the character seated at the Last Supper. The angles that he got so horribly wrong in the Annunciation were completed to perfection here. Lost in arguments over who Lisa was is the mystery of why he chose to paint her in the first place. Just 2 years prior, Da Vinci had grown to hate his paintbrush. For a year and a half, he had focused on the work of a military engineer, witnessing war firsthand for the first time in his life. Upon his return, he reluctantly picked up his paintbrush to create the Battle of Alglahari. While he had initially been eager to paint what he now intimately knew, he again cast down his brush after growing frustrated that he had been unknowingly pitted in competition against the younger Michelangelo. Yet here, for perhaps a relatively minor sum of money, he not only decided to paint a portrait, but held on to it for a decade and a half. Isaacson notes that he suspects the main reason that Leonardo decided to paint Lisa del Giocondo is that he wanted to paint her, because she was somewhat obscure. Not a famed noble or even the mistress of one, he could portray her as he wished. There was no need to cater to or take directions from a powerful patron. Most important, she was beautiful and enticing, and she had an alluring smile. It is believed that Da Vinci worked off and on just her lips for 12 years. Isaacson tells us that during that time he added thin layer after layer of little glazed strokes as he perfected it, retouched it, and imbued it with new depths of understanding about humans and nature. The painting itself is quite small. It looks even smaller than it is because of the size of the room that it inhabits in the Louvre. Once inside the space, the viewer has to deal with a crowd that seeks to both look at it up close, before then proceeding to back up and walk from side to side in order to see the lady's eyes tracking you as though she is present in the moment with you. Although he didn't invent it, the technique to achieve such movement is widely known as the Mona Lisa effect. But more than anything, people focus on her smile, trying to figure out what she, or Da Vinci, was thinking at the time. Humanity has long obsessed over her smile. During World War II, the British used the code phrase, "The Mona Lisa keeps her smile," when they contacted the French resistance forces in Vichy, France. In 2005, her image was put through modern facial recognition technology by researchers from the University of Amsterdam. The results suggest that she is 83% happy, 9% disgusted, 6% fearful, and 2% angry. Filmmaker Stanley Kubrick would have been 100% angry upon hearing that our obsession resulted in such lengths that we would turn to technology to psychologically analyze a piece of Renaissance art. He posed the question, how could we possibly appreciate the Mona Lisa if Leonardo had written at the bottom of the canvas, "The lady is smiling because she is hiding a secret from her lover"? In this mind, this would shackle the viewer to reality. we know very little about the reality of what took place in preparing the original drawing. If it is true that Lisa is merely Leonardo in drag, then perhaps there was no prep work. If it was indeed a portrait celebrating the marriage between a silk merchant and a 24-year-old mother of two, then Lisa must have sat for the artist. Is this her smile, or the work of a master artist's imagination? Vasari believed that the artist was interested in her smile from the beginning, employing multiple assistants to keep her laughing while he sketched. Yet despite his desire to show her smiling, some observers fail to see the finished product. Isaacson tells us that from his optics studies, Leonardo realized that light rays do not come to a single point in the eye, but instead hit the whole area of the retina, the central area of which, known as the fovea, is best at seeing color and small details. The area surrounding the fovea is best at picking up shadows and shading of black and white. When we glimpse it out of the corner of our eye, it is a bit blurred, as if it were further away. With this knowledge, Leonardo was able to create an uncatchable smile, one that is elusive if we are too intent on seeing it. Indeed, if you stare directly at the mouth, your retina catches these tiny details and delineations, making her appear not to be smiling. The result is a smile that flickers brighter the less you search for it. When it is removed from behind its protective glass, the impressions of movement are described by its curator as even more pronounced. Despite its importance to our culture, the Mona Lisa has never been officially cleaned by the Louvre. Her missing eyebrows, considered by some as proof that Da Vinci hadn't yet finished his work, likely took so long to do them that he painted them over a layer of oil which had already dried, the result of which would have meant that the eyebrows would have been accidentally taken off the first time it was cleaned. Indeed, modern X-ray analysis has revealed that at some point her eyebrows did in fact exist. The painting is held up far better than most works of Renaissance art. This is in part due to the experimental oil mixture which he used for this particular work. Modern-day researchers have found microscopic fragments of lead within the work, something that would have helped to make it thicker for the wooden panel beneath the more than 30 layers of paint. Still, it's hard to tell what it looked like while it sat for years in Leonardo's various studios. For instance, her veil is nearly translucent, with merely a line visible beneath her hairline. Isaacson tells his readers to look at where her hair comes out from under her veil at her right forehead. Although the veil is almost transparent, the hair underneath is painted to look a tiny bit gauzier and lighter than the hair flowing from underneath it, covering her right ear. When the unveiled hair cascades over her chest on both sides, Leonardo is back to creating the swirling curls he adored throughout his other works. These thin layers of glaze allowed for the colors to reflect back the light, resulting in the impression of depth, luminosity, and volume. The techniques that he used, however, make the painting nearly impossible to restore. That means that we will have to live with the cracks and yellowish color that certainly weren't there in the 16th century. Technology, along with versions done by Da Vinci's assistants, allows us to see what the Mona Lisa was. Her pale white skin pops against a blue sky with a pronounced brown background, while her red sleeves draw your attention downward away from her famous smile. A former restorer at the Louvre discussed the difficulty of providing Lisa with a modern facelift. He stated bluntly that if you want to drive a restorer to suicide, ask him to tackle the Mona Lisa. This means that we'll have to live with her imperfections, even if Da Vinci held on to her for so long in his attempts to perfect her. Author Chuck Palahniuk sees value in such a thought, noting that Leonardo's Mona Lisa is just 1,000 smears of paint, Michelangelo's David is just 1,000,000 hits with a hammer. We're all of us 1,000,000 bits put together the right way. In addition to being considered one of the most perfect works of art in existence, the Mona Lisa is also famous for being famous. Art critic Jason Farago believes that this is reason enough to take down Da Vinci's last known work of art. He justifies his claim by revealing that research indicates that some 80% of visitors to the Louvre are there for the Mona Lisa, and most of them leave unhappy with the cramped viewing. Farago concludes his thought with the vastly overridden statement of content in the 20th century to be merely famous. She has become, in this age of mass tourism and digital narcissism, a black hole of anti-art who has turned the museum inside out. To an extent, he is right, as the Mona Lisa has gone from beloved to pursued, and now to used. Clearly, Da Vinci loved this piece of art, perhaps more than anything else he created. In 1515, he traveled to France upon the invitation of the 21-year-old monarch Francis I. It was the first time that the 64-year-old had ever left the confines of Italy. Salah, his consort across parts of 4 decades, remained behind, inheriting Da Vinci's vineyard, which the artist had received as a portion of his payment for the Last Supper. Leonardo returned to his love of staging pageants, working personally to help the king celebrate his son's baptism, as well as the marriage of his niece. During this time, he tried his hand at urban planning, creating at least 16 complex drawings related to the deluge of water. Although nearly every critic believes that Da Vinci was dabbling in metaphors for the emotional turmoil of having survived a stroke and knowing that the end of his life was near. He died in 1519 at the age of 67. His quote, "As a well-spent day brings a happy sleep, so a well-employed life brings a happy death," suggests that although his life was far from perfect, he was content with the race that he had run. The Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne were the only 3 paintings that he had brought with him to France. We are unsure where precisely he located the Mona Lisa, but some claim that it was within the apartments of his chateau, a beloved treasure that he was never willing to relinquish until it met his exhaustive standard of perfection. From there it became pursued. The French king purchased it from Salah and initially displayed it in his palace at Fontainebleau. A century later, it was removed by Louis XIV, the regent that would later transform his Louvre fortress into a home for Paris's struggling artists. The Sun King took it and countless other works of art to Versailles. Although the revolutionaries of France believed their work to be the ultimate modernist statement of destroy everything, don't build on the past, there is no past, they returned the work of Renaissance art to the Louvre. It only languished there for a short time, as the newly crowned Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, had it installed to reside within his wife's private bedchamber. He was said to have been so fascinated that the serial philanderer tracked down and seduced Teresa Gauguin, a relative of Mona herself 300 years removed. Creepily, Napoleon wasn't the only person to fall in love with the Renaissance beauty, with historian R.A. Scotti revealing that although there were more than 1 million artworks in the Louvre collection, she alone received her own mail. Mona Lisa received many love letters, and for a time they were so ardent that she was placed under police protection. She was stolen in 1911 after 3 crooks spent the night hidden within a closet. Once the museum closed, they got to work taking the 200 pounds of painting frame and protective glass case off the wall. They stripped the latter too and carried out the wooden canvas with a blanket covering it straight past security after the museum opened for business the next day. Upon the discovery of the theft, France shut down its national borders and began a manhunt that led them to one of the 20th century's greatest artists, Pablo Picasso. The Spanish painter was blamed for the heist, in part because he had previously paid thieves to loot the Louvre. Without any other clues, the police decided to check in on Picasso and his group of artistic firebrands, which were known around town as the Wild Men of Paris. Although the police couldn't turn up the Mona Lisa, they found 2 small statues in his residence that were stamped with the words "Property of the Louvre." During the trial, Picasso wept openly in court, but as the website artsy.net tells us, the deluge of contradictory and nonsensical testimony resulted in the judge throwing out the case. 2 years later, she surfaced again in Florence, along with the revelation from the thief that the only reason behind the criminal act was to see her return to her native homeland. The spontaneous fanfare arising from her prompt return to Paris propelled the painting from being a famous work of art to the most famous piece of art in the world. When the theft was announced, thousands came to the Louvre to stare in shock at the blank wall which had held it. They left behind flowers, notes, and other remembrances, as though Lady Lisa herself had just tragically died. After she was restored, French society women adopted her look, dusting yellow powder on their faces and necks to obtain her unique complexion. Some went so far as to immobilize their facial muscles to mimic her smile. Historian Diane Hales tells us that between the time that it was stolen and then returned, something beyond the painting's wild popularity had changed. The Mona Lisa had left the Louvre a work of art. She returned as a public property, the first mass art icon. She was pursued to great lengths by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. Hitler was himself a failed artist, and just like the dictators of the Italian city-states of the Renaissance sought to use art to paper over his authoritarianism. In their efforts to rewrite history, they destroyed priceless works of art which depicted the multicultural real world. As much as 1/5 of all of Europe's art is estimated to have been seized by the Third Reich. France's director of national museums, Jacques Jourgon, acted decisively upon the annexation of Austria in 1938. Deciding for himself that appeasement had no chance of succeeding, he enacted a secret plan to evacuate most of the art residing in the Louvre. He jumped into action on August 25, 1939. Closing the Louvre for unannounced repairs that would last for 3 days. Lisa was among the thousands of artifacts secreted out, resting for the moment in a custom case cushioned with velvet and marked with 3 red dots, denoting it as the highest priority of the lot. Unwilling to admit that they had been bamboozled, the Nazi government that was installed in Paris reopened the museum in 1940. Although most of its walls merely contained empty frames. It would be moved another 5 times throughout the war in order to prevent Lisa from residing within the private bedchambers of the Fuhrer. At each move, it was carried out by stretcher before being placed in an armored van while escorted by an alert curator who would later reveal that he feared for his life each trip. But that was more to the fact that the vehicle was sealed airtight in order to maintain constant humidity rather than the threat posed by the Nazis. We have thus far established that she was both beloved and pursued. We'll end this series with how the Mona Lisa has been used and abused. She lost her eyebrows in a cleaning mishap. Other incidents, however, have been far less well-intended. In 1956, a Bolivian man threw a rock at the portrait. Despite the glass, he managed to knock off a speck of paint. This and subsequent abuses highlight the thoughtlessness of some individuals. The perpetrator explained himself by saying, "I had a stone in my pocket. and suddenly the idea to throw it came to mind. She traveled to Tokyo in 1974. On the first day of display, a young Japanese woman attempted to spray paint it to draw attention to the lack of accommodations for the Mona Lisa's disabled fans. About 20 to 30 droplets of spray paint made it onto the priceless work. She was fined 3,000 yen, but must have smiled as she wrote the check, as the National Museum set aside a viewing day exclusively for the disabled community of Japan. In 2009, a Russian woman hit the painting with a teacup. The Louvre called her deranged, which perhaps made France's immigration departments pat themselves on the back for denying her citizenship, the supposed cause of the woman's frustrations. Another mentally ill man dressed up as an elderly woman in a wheelchair for his 2022 attack on the work of art. His supposed disability allowed him to bypass the line that holds back the majority of the onlookers. Once in place, he jumped out of his seat, took off his wig, smeared cake on the protective glass, and then gave a speech about how people on this planet were attempting to destroy it. A similar protest occurred in 2024, when climate activists splashed soup on the glass. As security dragged them away, they asked, "What is more important, art or the right to have a healthy and sustainable food system?" Jackie Disforge, a former art gallery attendant, wrote an op-ed for the LA Times about the string of art-related protests in recent years. She is surprisingly sympathetic to the protesters, writing, "I waver in thinking whether the act of throwing food at a painting is or isn't insane on practical and philosophical levels. But I feel strongly that the sentiment behind the act is spot on. I feel insane reading the news most days. I feel insane throwing my cans into the recycling bin, bringing my totes to the grocery store, wondering if any of it even makes a dent. I watch as climate scientists continuously update our expiration date. I watch all of us, myself included, going about our days as though they aren't numbered, and none of it feels more or less insane than throwing soup at a painting. Whether or not smearing mashed potatoes on a glass-enclosed painting is an appropriate response, it feels like energy matching energy. We are facing extinction. More than that, we are creating it. We are the artists of our own extinction, painting ourselves out of the picture. These activists feel to me like Earth's version of a gallery attendant running around telling us all to step back. We are getting too close." As long as the Mona Lisa is famous, attacks on her will draw attention, and therefore be used by those seeking attention for their causes. It would be interesting to hear Da Vinci's thoughts on his work being used in such a manner. On one hand, the naturalists who seem to love nature more than anything else on this planet would surely side with the soup-throwing environmentalists. Martin Kemp, the Oxford art historian, believes that he would love the fuss, claiming that the Renaissance man was interested in fame and immortality. He would have been pleased that his name is still on people's lips. My own understanding of Leonardo leads me to believe that he would spend the entire day sitting in the gallery of the Louvre looking upon his work, loudly musing about the imperfections that only he seemed to see, while telling anyone who contradicted him that art is never finished, only abandoned. Perhaps the final clue in what he himself thought about the Mona Lisa lies in the fact that it traveled with him from Florence to Milan and again to Paris. Over the course of 16 years, even while facing his own death, he never abandoned her. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on the platform formerly known as Twitter. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.